Hi, I'm Marci Baker, here to share with you the simplest methods for your quilting success. Today I want to share with you Clearview Triangle rulers and how to use them. We have a 6, 8, 10, and 12 inch and also a Super 60. These were designed by Sarah Nephew back in the 80s, and this stack of books are all books that reference and use our Clearview Triangle rulers. So there's lots of opportunity to be creative. The designers include Sarah Nephew, myself, Gail Bong, and Maxine Rosenthal. There are other designers such as Ginny Beyer, Kay Fassett, Karen Combs, just to name a few, who design with 60 degree, and our rulers will do their designs. Some very traditional designs include grandmother's flower garden, tumbling blocks, 6-pointed stars. These are also some that if you wanted to do them, now you have the opportunity. Let me show you how easy these rulers are to use. So here are the basic shapes that we're going to be working with. We have a triangle, 60 degree. And we need to know what our finished height is right here. For my example that I'm going to demonstrate with, we're going to say that's 2 inches. So our 2-inch finished height is what I want, and we need to cut a triangle that we now allow for our 1/4-inch seam allowance. Okay, so to get this size triangle, we're going to take our finished height, which is 2 inches, and we always add 3/4 inch for seam allowance. This is our seam allowance. And we'll need to do that on each shape that we're doing. So 2 3/4 is what we would cut in order to cut a triangle and then have it finish out to 2 inches. Then we have 60 degree diamonds. And these are 60 degree here, and it's from this side to this side is our finished height. And this will match the triangles because we want them to sew and come into a design together. This is 2 inch. We're going to take that finished height and we're going to add 1/2 inch seam allowance, so like squares. On the triangle we had to add an extra 1/4 inch for this extra long tip here. And we also have that whenever we do our triangle halves. We're going to do our 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around, and notice how long that needs to be up at the top. So if this is 2 inches from here to here, then I need to do 2 inches plus 1 1/4 inch for my seam allowance. These are the 3 measurements we need for these 3 basic shapes. Oh, and I forgot to show you the 1/4 inch seam allowance on this one. Okay, so those are the measurements that we need. I want to show you how we can cut this shape and this shape out of a 2 1/2 inch size strip. And that way we can get all of our shapes out of the same size strips. Let me show you on the next page. So now let's look at that triangle again, and I said I could get that out of a 2 1/2 inch strip. And that is basically by adding only a 1/4 inch at the top and a 1/4 inch on the other sides. I still need, this is still 2 inches finished, I still need to cut a 2 3/4 inch triangle, but I can cut it from a 2 1/2 inch strip. Cut a 2 1/2 inch or 2 3/4 inch triangle from a 2 1/2 inch strip. And you'll see that when we use the ruler, but basically the tip of the triangle that we cut is missing. And then for the diamond, that's going to be the same thing. So let me show you on the half triangle how we can get this, which is 2 inches on the height, from a 2 1/2 inch. And basically we're cutting that tip off. But the size of this half triangle is a 3 1/4 inch half triangle from a 2 1/2 inch strip. Okay, we've saved some fabric by not cutting this long piece that would then be cut off anyway. But we also need to know we are still cutting a 3 1/4 inch half triangle, and we're still cutting a 2 3/4 inch triangle, just cutting it from a 2 1/2 inch strip. There are 2 other basic shapes that I'd like to share, and that is if we were to take a triangle and add a diamond to it. So it looks like that. That's a trapezoid. We also call them flat pyramids. And so this is what your piece wants to look like. If you're doing my tumbling blocks, you'll see this shape quite often. But we need to allow for the seam allowance going around that shape. And I want to give you, how do you figure measurement of what this is and how does it cut? You take the height, the finished height, which we know is 2 inches, and you take 2 inches times 2, and then you're going to add to that your 3/4 inch seam allowance. So this would be 4 3/4 is the ruler line that you'll see me using, and you'll see in just a sec how the ruler line is used there. But this is the type of seam allowance we need to add, but what that base is, so that we're getting the right size to fit with our 2-inch triangle, is we have to take our finished size times 2 and then add 3/4 inch. Then we also have one that is like 2 diamonds next to each other, okay, cut out of one fabric. This is called a parallelogram, and we need to allow for the seam allowance. And the way you're going to figure this, if it was 2 diamonds next to each other, you would take your finished height, 2 inches, times 2, and we're only going to add a 1/2 inch like we did for our diamond. So this one would be 4 1/2 inch, and I'll show you how we cut this shape out of that. What I'm going to demonstrate here with cutting is if you, the viewer, is doing the cutting as a right-handed person. I'm going to be cutting left-handed, but I'll be talking about it. This is the way a right-handed person will see it and the way the ruler is, and I'll be making the cuts. If you read any of my books, I show step-by-step right-handed instructions like you'll be seeing here, but then for a left-hander, you turn the book upside down and then all of those illustrations become left-handed cuts. So that's a tip for left-handed cutters. So know that this is a right-handed person who's viewing this is going to be making the cutting. This is my 2 3/4 inch strip. I'm going to show how to cut a triangle, and it's 2 3/4 for our 2-inch finished size. The first step is to establish a 60-degree angle, and we want to be down at the right end of the strip, line up any rule line, and cut our angle. And the tip of the ruler is up, or it could be even down, or we could have our fabric stacked right and left, or up and down. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut that angle. And the longer line I use, the more established that 60 is to the rest of this strip. And we've made our cut, and then we're going to take and turn this so our cut angle is to the left. And now I'm going to start marking or cutting off triangles. And I've marked my ruler with Q-Tool's cutting edge. It goes up against the fabric, so it makes me line my ruler up a lot quicker. And for a 2 3/4 inch triangle, 2 3/4 from the tip of the ruler to that line, then my cutting edge, that's going to give me a 2 3/4 inch triangle. I'm lined up here, I'm lined up there, and I make the cut. And then to make more cuts, we're going to be rotating the ruler. Again, line up 2 3/4, line up the edge, and make the cut. Another thing about working with these rulers, if you have problems with them sliding, I'd recommend that you take and put your hand so that there's a finger or two off the edge, away from where you're cutting, and we're going to make that cut. And that will help hold it so that I don't tend to push the ruler away and have it slide. So that's how we make the 2 3/4 inch triangle cuts. Now let me show you how we do diamonds. Now, diamonds, we need a 2 1/2 inch wide strip. So here I have a 2 1/2 inch strip for my diamond that I've already established the 60-degree angle like we did before. Then we take and turn that around. So we're down at the left end of the strip. And we're going to take and have 2 1/2 inches running along here that we're measuring, counting 1, 2 1/2. And in fact, let me put some of my cutting edge there, and I'll show you how to apply that. We take and we count on the back side of the ruler, 1, 2 1/2. Then I place my cutting edge and just attach one single spot, get it lined up, and then we attach it along the way. And be consistent. People ask me all the time in class, what is the part of the line? This side, that side, the center. The center is what a graphics designer designs to, and the center of the line is the exact measurement. So as long as you're consistent for a lot of these thinner lines, that will be good. For these thicker 1-inch lines, you'll want to center it and have half of it covered with the orange and half of it not. So that's how I mark my 2 1/2. And now as I go to cut, I've got 2 1/2 marked there, so from side to side is 2 1/2 inches. But I also have these extra lines, which are nice. They allow me to guarantee that I keep true to my 60-degree angle. So we can make this cut. And that is our 2.5-inch diamond that's going to fit with our 2 3/4-inch triangle. Notice how that tip is sticking up. Okay? And then we need to cut those half triangles, and that is out of a 3 1/4-inch strip. And on this first one, we're going to first establish a nice 90-degree angle. And I'm down at the right end of the strip, and I line up any rule line that's going down the center of the ruler with an edge of the fabric and cut that square. And then I'm going to take this square end and turn it over here. And as we're cutting these pieces off here, remember that measurement, it was a 3 1/4-inch triangle. So I have 3 1/4 marked. And I don't mark this if I'm only making one cut, but I will mark it any multiple cuts that I'm doing. And we're going to have 3 1/4 lined up along here, and then the tip of the ruler should be at the edge there because it's a 3 1/4-inch strip, and we're going to cut that triangle. And if you want to look at this from here to here up to here, that's the finished triangle or half triangle that you're going to be using. And that will work with our triangle here that we have. Because of the seam allowance that we need to take, we'll be working with that point right there and that point there. Okay, so that is our half triangle, and we've got our diamond and our triangle. That's cutting it out of the sizes of strips that we measured, and we added the full seam allowance. Let me show you how we cut it all out of a 2 1/2-inch wide strip and have tips missing basically on the triangles and the diamonds. So now we're working with, this is a 2 1/2-inch wide strip, which I know we can cut our diamonds from, but we can also cut our triangles and our half triangles from them. And I've already established the 60 and then turned it to the left, and we're going to be doing our triangles. It's still a 2 3/4-inch triangle with the tip missing. The edge of the ruler is there, and we're just saving fabric by using that 2 1/2-inch wide strip. And we would continue flipping it, but again, it's still a 2 3/4. And later I'll talk about some rulers have that tip missing and what the difference is and why you may or may not want to use that. So we continue cutting those triangles. Now let's look at how we cut that half triangle using this width so that the tip is missing. So here we're going to be cutting a half triangle, and this is different than the last one I just showed where it was square. I'm going to show you the second way that you need to cut. And we line up any of these rule lines, and I'm just going to use the thinner one, it's easier to see, along the edge of the fabric, and then we're going to push this until the 3/8-inch line is up here in the corner. So I'm lined up here, and I've got 3/8 inch from the bottom edge of the ruler in is the point there. And we'll make that cut. And then if we're going to make the secondary cut, because it's the tip missing, and we're doing the 3 1/4, and we'll move this. I didn't mention it. On the cutting edge, this just comes off. You stick it again on your ruler, use it over and over. I store it on my ruler. It will last forever, and it works great because it catches your ruler at your fabric. And here what I'm going to line up is I'm going to have 3 1/4 along the bottom edge, and then the center line is going to run along the center there, and that should line up there. Yep, we've got it. And once you've cut a shape, you can always use that as a template to make sure you are measuring and cutting the same thing. So that gives us the second cut, and notice the tip is missing on that. Okay, now we need to cut our other shapes. The one was the flat pyramid or trapezoid, which is this shape right here, and we know it's going to be a 4 3/4, and that's 4 3/4 measuring from the top of the ruler. So I counted down 1, 2, 3, 4 3/4, then I put my cutting edge, and that line goes along the base. The edge of the tool or the ruler is along the edge of the fabric, and that's the shape I'm going to cut. This will be a trapezoid that will fit with my diamonds and my triangles out of 2 1/2-inch wide strip. We cut a 4 3/4. So here we have that I'm going to show you how to do the parallelogram, which is this shape, and we needed to cut a 4 1/2-inch parallelogram from a 2 1/2-inch strip. And to measure that, we're going to be cutting along the base of the ruler. You'll see that in a second. And because I want 4 1/2, I count 1, 2, 3, 4 1/2, And then I put my cutting edge because I'm going to line it up this way. And we have this lined up here and this lined up here, making sure we stay at a 60, and we'll cut that. Now notice this one, this parallelogram, leans to the left. And it's important to know which you have, one that's leaning to the left, or you could have one that's leaning to the right. Now batiks are great because if you make a mistake in cutting a left or a right, you can just turn it over like I just did. But you want to know whether you're getting rights, they lean to the right, or a left, that they lean to the left. So in the instructions of your pattern, it will tell you whether you need left or right and which way to cut. So watch that on your diamonds. So here is the Super 60, the other ruler that I mentioned. All of the 6, 8, 10, and 12 would be used the same way. The Super 60 has this base that's a 120-degree angle, and you can do some specialty cuts quickly using this ruler. But this one is not quite as versatile as just, say, the 10-inch is what I'd recommend if you want to buy one ruler. In order to cut a diamond, remember how I was measuring and cutting from the base of the triangle, which we can't do from this ruler? So the way you cut diamonds is that you have your 60-degree established, and that would have been done this way. Then we take and we turn this, turn it down to the left end, and then we need to cut a diamond. We're going to use our ruler. Oh, let me get that. And we're going to line up our 2.5 inch for our 2.5 inch diamond along here. The edge of the ruler is there, and we're going to cut only on this side for a right-handed cut. Do not cut on this side. That's the one thing that I caution people if they're using that Super 60. Also, whenever it's right at that tip, it's kind of hard to get right in there and make that cut, but you can be careful and not trim your ruler with your rotary cutter. So that's how easy it is to use our ruler. I do have a word of caution. There are other rulers on the market where they have removed the top 1/4 inch of the ruler, and their zero therefore starts a 1/4 inch below our ruler. They have removed that to make it appear to be simpler. However, by leaving the tip, you saw how it was easier to cut by having that tip of the ruler on there. And also, I can do any design with this ruler. If I were using this ruler, I'd have to figure out the math and do some adjustments. So if you want to start designing or start creating with these books, I would recommend using Clearview Triangle ruler. It's a lot easier to work with. I'm Marci Baker, here to share with you the simpler methods that guarantee you success in your quilting. Thanks for joining me, and enjoy your 60-degree designs.